I just saw one of the topics, no slavery in ancient Israel. But like in the Bible, it talks about slavery, right? So,
Yeah, you're talking about the English translation. The underlying Hebrew word is a neutral term, meaning forced captivity and forced labor, unless, of course, you're talking about, let's say, prisoners of war. Number two, it says that kidnapping is punishable by death. Okay, so forced confinement, unless it's on legal grounds, right, is a form of kidnapping, so it would be punishable by death. Okay. The Old Testament law, God tells the Jews, you are not to oppress your fellow Israelites or foreigners the way you were oppressed in Egypt under the Pharaoh. So how were they oppressed by Pharaoh? By forced confinement and forced servitude. So the mistake that you're making is you're capitalizing on the unfortunate choice of 20th century English translators to translate the word for servant as slave because it has antebellum slavery connotations. So when Old Testament talks about a slave, in the English, you should translate it servant, meaning one who serves another. Then you'll have to go into the specific context to determine whether it's to be reckoned to be a forced confinement and servitude or not.
okay. So like, how exactly would you like define slavery versus servant?
The word slave in our modern term refers to somebody who is forcibly confined, which is a type of kidnapping, and forced servitude. Okay? A servant is anybody who acts to benefit somebody else. So in the Old Testament, God refers to himself by the word eved, which is the same word that's translated slave. Okay? The mistake that people make is that they're sloppy and don't do diligence to look beyond the choice of the translators. Okay, what is the Hebrew word here? You might want to watch Dr. Peter J. Williams' lecture, a scholarly lecture on slavery in the Old Testament. He's even written a scholarly paper to this effect that's saying that it's just an unfortunate choice of English translators to translate it slave. It doesn't mean we can show you many passages where eved is used. It doesn't mean forced captivity. Abraham refers to himself as an eved to people who come to visit him. Was Abraham saying he was their slave? And by the way, when we look in other foreign languages, I forget what language it is. It might be Hungarian. I just can't remember what language it is. The word for somebody to serve another is Slav. Okay? So you're making a mistake upon the unfortunate choice of the 20th century English translators.
Okay. I get that. But then like it also says in the Bible to like you can beat your like it says slaves, but you're saying it's like servant, right?
Again, you're being sloppy and you haven't done your due diligence. This is what we call casuistic law. If this happens and that happens, then this will happen. This is not a command or even a prescription to invoke corporal punishment. It simply says, if a master were to do this and the person were to die, then the master is to be put to death. Okay? Now, in the Old Testament law, if you had been more well-read, it says that if a servant flees whom the person they're serving, they cannot be forcibly returned. So wouldn't it have been counterproductive to severely administer corporal punishment where somebody would run away and they can't be returned?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so it is not, this passage is not a prescription for corporal punishment. It is simply casuistic, meaning if this happens and that happens, then this will happen. In other words, somebody who's acting in service to another, if the so-called master acts in corporal punishment where the person dies, they're to die.
Okay. Then could I get like a clarification? Then I'm not saying I know.
This is why.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I think your internet's cutting out.
Hey, Darth, you got the little internet thing by your name.
All right. Well, I mean,
No,
anyway.
I'm listening.
Oh, okay. It says internet, but so I'm not saying I know. I was just seeking clarification. Can I read like where I read this, and then you guys could give me like context? Because I was Can I read like Bible Exodus 21?
Yeah.
20 to 21? Because that's what I read, and then that's why I was like conflicted with this. All right. If a man beats his male or female slave with a rod, and the slave dies as a direct result, he must be punished. But he's not to be punished if the slave gets up after a day or two, since the slave is his property. So, I mean, I read that just off my definition. It says
property
is property.
Yeah. In that language, what this is referring to, it means that you own the contractual service. Okay, it is not prohibiting instances of corporal punishment in the instance that somebody is contractually obligated to serve another. Okay,
it'd be like this. Imagine
you hire property. You have to understand the context within which that was written. This was not written within the context of either antebellum or the post Civil War. When it says that they are their property, is their contractual service is what is their property. Just like any football player or basketball star who signs a contract, their service is owned by somebody.
Okay, so you're saying it's not the actual servant that's owned?
Because it's already owning somebody in the form of property and forced confinement and forced servitude is already prohibited under Old Testament law.
Oh,
You're just reacting to the unfortunate rendering of the English and a failure to do due diligence as to the underlying Hebrew and culture.
In Jewish thinking, a human being was the property of God, so another human being couldn't own another human being because you're owned by God.
So what is their property is their contractual service. So, for example, why do we call somebody who is the head of a football team, why is he called the owner?
He's the owner of the team.
Yeah. Does he own the team?
Yeah.
He owns the business contracts.
Yeah. So this is just business language. What you're doing is, this is the mistake that most unbelievers, because they haven't even done due diligence to see what scholars say about this language. Remember, we're talking about ancient Hebrew into English, and you can't always easily translate things, right? And so it behooves you to go in and look at what the ancient culture was, what the laws were, how the language. So when it says they owns them, it doesn't mean they own them like chattel slavery. That's already prohibited.
But it's more than just a language issue, because it's also like what's being described here is a socioeconomic institution of servanthood. And so that socioeconomic institution doesn't exist in society anymore. We have different things to replace it. So it's hard to use our language to describe this socioeconomic institution that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it was a covenant. It's different.
Suppose somebody owns a McDonald's, and the owner of the McDonald's has a contractor come in and sign a contract to perform a certain service, and he gets paid for it. He then dies, and the ownership of McDonald's is passed on to his son as the heir. Mm-hmm. The son, the heir, now owns as his property the contractual obligation for service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So when we look, see, people ask these questions because they don't do due diligence and research what else the Old Testament, the Mosaic Law says. Okay, if you can't forcibly confine somebody, kidnapping, how are you going to own somebody? Okay, if they have the legal right to leave anytime they want and they can't be forcibly returned according to Mosaic law, how do you own them in terms of chattel slavery?
Okay, so just to clarify, so you're saying they're not owning them as like people, they're just owning
they're owning their contractual service.
Okay.
Their property. Okay, have you ever heard of intellectual property?
Yeah,
like my uncle is an engineer, right? And so if he creates something, the business that employs him would own whatever he creates. His intellectual property belongs to the corporation he works for.
There's different notions of property. Okay? Okay, so property extends more than just to a tangible object. Property can include contractual service. Just like in our culture, we've extended that to intellectual property. Now, is that a contradiction in terms, intellectual property?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay. So property is more than just talking about a tangible object. It can include contractual service. So the person owns them insofar as they are contractually obligated. The owner of the Giants owns the contractual service of the quarterback.
Well, wouldn't it be a contradiction to call like Deconstruction Justin's YouTube channel intellectual property?
It would be, yes.
Who is that?
It's somebody on TikTok who worships a rock named Doug.
His brains are made in the image of a rock.
He's made in the image of a rock.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, he's just an atheist we're making fun of, that he's so intellectually inept to falsify God, he has to resort to the adolescent doing a parody of Christian theism by saying he has a rock Doug, which is God. When people do stuff like that, they're just revealing their intellectual bankruptcy.
Hey, Darth, why is ice cream always so angry?
What's that?
Why is ice cream always so angry?
I suspect that he has skeletons in his closet. He also has been on camera packaging things for sale that are probably illegal in many states. Okay. And so he's involved in certain activities that a lot of people would consider to be immoral. And so people whose behavior or lifestyle is at odds with God, there's a tendency for them, rather than to humble themselves, they then just irrationally deny God's existence. The guy's a train wreck. He's constantly asserting there is no God. His prompt says there is no God, but he has admitted on several occasions that he cannot defend the statement there is no God. I've been on his stream twice, and each time he was nothing short of abusive and literally batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's an understatement.
Okay. I want to come back to our topic. I thought it was interesting. I also have. Can I read like one more? Leviticus 25.
Yep.
Okay. So Leviticus 25, 45 to 47. Oh yeah. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves.
Yeah.
You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. So I mean,
We've already
I
addressed
understand.
Yeah, the McDonald's example.
We've already
Yeah.
addressed that.
But if it's for life and they can't,
Yeah, you're not understanding. In that passage, it goes on where it talks about that if somebody is in a servitude to somebody else in terms of a contractual obligation, if the relationship is such between the servant and whom they're serving that they want to remain in their servant forever, they can make it permanent. They can claim, yeah, I'm going to be your servant forever because the person's such a great person.
Sure. Let me read something to you. This is from the book, The Technological Society. So the author is a sociologist, and a sociologist would be an expert on like how to define what is and isn't slavery because it's a sociological institution. So he says in this book, there was in fact greater technical progress in civilizations where slavery was prevalent, for example, Egypt, than in others where the institution was practically unknown, for example, Israel. So there's extra confirmation here from an expert source that there's no like really. I mean, there's the
what is the source? So I could just check it out.
it's the book is the tech. Well, the whole book is just a passage in the book. The book's not really about the topic, but he does.
Yeah, could you just give it to me so I could just check it out?
Yeah, it's the Technological Society. The author is a sociologist. He's a professor at a university.
Shock.
It's an academic book. I think it's page 36. I might be wrong on that, though.
He says slavery was practically unknown.
Practically unknown in Israel, as opposed to Egypt. And that's consistent with what we see in the Bible, right? In the Bible, the Israelites are treated like slaves. And then God, what does God do? He frees them. So does it make sense? Like, oh, I have freed you from captivity. Now I want you to go.
Yeah, and go enslave these other people.
Other people. Yeah, it makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah. Okay. So are you saying when
So what the mistake
the-
that's being made here is a reaction to both lack of proper context and reacting to certain words such as slave and property. But such words do not easily translate, okay? Because the concept of property extends beyond tangible objects. Property includes contractual obligations for service.
Okay, so these
So to make it
servants?
very clear, this response is not special pleading, nor is it ad hoc. Okay? But you see, the critics of the Old Testament who are trying to slander and defame the God of the Bible, they haven't done their due diligence. Let me give you an example of this type of worse than sloppiness. Jeff for Truth, who has some bizarre emotional hatred for Christianity in the Bible, he says that the birth accounts of Jesus in Matthew and Luke flatly contradict themselves, that they're giving that Jesus was born with a disparity between 15 years, that it says in Matthew, Jesus was born during the reign of Herod versus Jesus was born when Queen was governor. Okay? So we know the year that Quirinius was the governor. Okay? But in Luke does not use the standard Greek term for governor. Luke uses a more non-specific word for a government official, not the standard word for governor, although it's translated that way in certain translations as governor. So what Luke was saying was that Jesus was born during the census overseen by the high official Quirinius. So that doesn't mean there's a 15-year gap. Now, let's say we say the word should be translated governor when we know it doesn't have to be. It still would not be a problem because there are major historical figures who will be referred to by certain titles that they acquired in their fame. So what if I told you that President Reagan rescued somebody from drowning. Okay, would that be a historical contradiction?
No.
Because he wasn't president yet.
Okay.
If somebody achieves a position of high notoriety, suppose I said, just let me try to think of an example.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you.
What if I said movie star Cary Grant? Movie star Cary Grant used to shine shoes when he was a teenager. Well, wait a minute. When he was a teenager shining shoes, his name wasn't Cary Grant. It was Archibald Leach. And he wasn't a famous movie star.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with you.
It's accurate for me to say movie star Cary Grant used to shine shoes.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you on that.
So when Luke says Mary and Joseph went to go fulfill the census under that was under the auspices of Governor Quirinius. Again, this is not special pleading or an ad hoc rescue. Okay? There's nowhere can we discount, and also, as it is in ancient history, like it is in modern history, people move up the ranks in government service, sometimes to higher and higher positions. So if we're referring to Quirinius by his most famous status of something that he was overseeing, 15 years earlier, it's not saying that he conducted the census while he was the governor. It's just referring to him as the governor of Syria. So my point is this, is that people will jump on something and allege it's a contradiction when they haven't done due diligence to find out what are the range of possibilities. And this is what they do with the Old Testament, because they're not interested in looking at all the different scenarios. They're looking to defecate on the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, yeah, I'm not familiar with the governor or
Governor Quirinius, but it's not the word for governor.
Yeah, I understand that.
But even if it was governor, it still would not necessarily entail a contradiction. Now, if Luke made it entirely clear that Quirinius was conducting the census simultaneously when he was governor, then that would be a contradiction. But Luke could be referring to Quirinius as overseeing the census 15 years earlier, but somebody who went on to be appointed the governor of a whole country or region of which he became noted for. And it wouldn't be a contradiction.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Only be a historical contradiction if Luke was clearly saying that Quirinius was conducting the census while he was the governor, other than the fact that it was Quirinius who was referred to, who became eventually the governor of Syria. Just like somebody becomes the governor of California, or somebody who becomes the president of the United States, or somebody becomes a famous movie star.
Yep, I agree with you on that. Can we go back to the slavery thing? I want to... Yeah. Can I just read one more verse? This is Leviticus 25:39-42. Reason I'm reading this, because it has both the words servant and slave. So, if one of your countrymen becomes poor among you and sells himself to you, do not make him work as a slave. He is to be treated as a hired worker or temporary resident among you. He is to work for you under the year of Jubilee. Then he and his children are to be released, and he will go back to his own clan and to the property of his forefathers. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold.
There you go. That rules out slavery in the Old Testament.
No, but it's like, so what this says is that it says the word servants and hired worker.
Yeah, and do you understand that words have to be understood contextually? So, for example, did you ever see the movie Galaxy Quest?
No, I have not.
Okay, so it's a spoof on Star Trek, and in one scene of the movie, they land on a planet to find a rare mineral to power their ship, and these little tiny aliens that look like little children coming out of a mine. Okay, and the one guy goes, "Are those the miners?" And the one person stupidly responds to that they're underage, and another character says, "Miners, not miners." Okay, so words have to be understood within their context. So what this is saying is you can purchase people's contractual obligation, but you are not to acquire them in terms of forced confinement and forced servitude like the other countries do. It's prohibiting chattel slavery.
Just for the Israelites, though.
No, it's telling the Israelites, you cannot do that.
Well, my understanding is it says you can't make the Israelites slaves because they're my servants, but you can buy slaves from neighboring nations.
Yeah, you can buy servants from other nations. You can acquire hired workers from other nations.
But then why doesn't it say servants?
Because we have different in America. We have different rules for foreign and
Yeah.
domestic workers, right? That's all that's going on.
Yeah,
but okay. So my question is, if in Leviticus 39 it says servant and hired worker, but then in 45 to 47 it explicitly says slave.
Because it's referring to a socioeconomic institution that doesn't exist anymore. That's hard to like. It's like food stamps. It's like Section 8. It's like welfare. It's like bank loans. That's what's going on. That's the closest comparison to our society in Leviticus 25.
Do not have, in the Old Testament, you do not have an unequivocal, explicit endorsement of forced kidnapping and forced servitude. What you have is people capitalizing on the unfortunate translation of 20th century translators. Do you know that the King James Bible translators never translate the word slave?
But they said servant, right?
They translated servant.
But then, so why is there the word servant and the word slave?
Yeah, the point is this, right? You are not to purchase your fellow Israelites as chattel slavery. You can buy or hired workers from other country, but you're not to buy. See, listen, it's prohibited. Do you understand? Kidnapping, forced confinement is prohibited under the penalty of death.
So when we actually look at the arguments that the so-called Christian slaveholders made in the United States to justify their slavery, they never bring up Leviticus 25 because they understood that what the Old Testament says would prohibit what they were doing in America. And so what they did was they appealed to this thing called the curse of Ham, which is a racist doctrine that's debunked. And they justified what they did because they said these are like the people are afflicted by the curse of Ham, and therefore they have less value. So it had nothing to do. They never mentioned any of these passages that you mentioned.
Do you have a source on that, just so I could clarify?
Yeah, I do.
Just look up slave owners in the South and the curse of Ham. So here's the deal: we do not have unequivocal, clear endorsement of chattel slavery. The critics of the Old Testament are simply capitalizing on the translation of certain words.
I actually can go through all the sources. We can get it right now.
I mean, I just did what you told me to search up.
What do we call it when a owner of a football team releases and acquires other football? It's called buying and selling players. They're buying and selling players. Okay? Do you know that somebody who's contractually obligated, certain types of contractual obligations to work for companies and corporations, do you know that they can farm them out contractually to other companies? Yeah. Under certain legal parameters, the company can tell somebody who's under a contractual obligation, you're going to fulfill this obligation by performing this service for this company over here. Okay? So the bottom line is that all the people attacking the Old Testament as promoting antebellum or chattel slavery are just simply trying to capitalize on the word ebed and the word you can own them as property. Yeah, you can own their contractual service. Contractual service is a form of property.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just referring to tangible property.
Okay.
Property is more than just tangible objects.
Yeah. Okay. But so when you say that, like, the reason why it says explicitly.
Let me ask you this
servant.
question: if your grandmother dies and she leaves you her bank account, is that your property?
I mean, yeah, I guess so.
Okay, can you? Okay, where's the tangible money and coins?
In the bank.
Where? No, it's not in the bank. It's represented by numbers in a log book in the computers. It's not tangible.
Yeah, but like the money
It's
is
not a tangible object.
Okay.
Okay? In other words, the bank doesn't have a vault where it has Granny's money. It has Granny's name, her account, and then a number in there. That's not tangible. That's not gold coins.
Here's a source: is Josiah Priest, Bible Defense of Slavery and Origin. And the Bible defense they use is they appeal to Genesis 9:25 and the curse of Ham. And it's just a stupid racist doctrine that no one believes. No one, it's debunked. There's no serious believer in this doctrine.
See, they wouldn't have resorted.
You told me to search it up.
They wouldn't have resorted to an appeal to the Old Testament because they were operating under the King James translation. That's why they never resorted to the passages that you brought up.
Well, I mean, I just searched up Christian slaveholder justification, and the first thing that came up was like they brought up Leviticus. Like you guys can search it up too. It's
Did they give up this? Did they give this specific verse?
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't justify it.
I mean, his claim was that they didn't use it, and the first source I found is that they did use it.
Well, I'd have to look.
What source says that?
The bottom line is simply
just
this.
search it up.
Does the law of Moses
No, but they used. But what verse did they use? We would
Listen
concede
carefully.
They used Genesis.
Does the law of Moses prohibit forced confinement?
Yeah.
Okay. That rules out chattel slavery.
They appealed to the Bible, but they appealed to Genesis 9 and the curse of Ham. They didn't appeal to Leviticus 25, which is the passages that you're evoking.
Yeah, wait. Let me just pull up the article again. I brought it up.
It's irrelevant what the antebellum slavers did. The bottom line is that the people who are bringing up slavery in the Old Testament to defame the God of the Bible are making exactly the same kind of mistakes I'm pointing out with Quirinius.
Mm-hmm.
It's a translation fallacy. It's a failure to do due diligence. Why is it that New Testament scholar Peter J. Williams, who's fluent in Koine Greek and Hebrew, and he's a trained Bible scholar, says that people haven't done their research. They're not understanding that Old Testament, quote, slavery is simply talking about contractual service, and that antebellum chattel slavery was prohibited. You see, they ignore all the passages that contradict chattel slavery. You are not to oppress your fellow Israelite and foreigners like you were in Egypt. Well, how was that? Forced confinement and forced servitude. Oops.
Eclipse. You should look up Exodus 21.
Exodus 21? Sure.
Verse 16. That's what Dart's alluding to.
Verse 16? Sure. Whoever kidnaps a person and sells them, or whoever is found in possession of them, shall be put to death.
And Leviticus 19:33, when a foreigner resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him.
Okay. So I see that. But then I also, like, the reason why I'm not ignoring these. I see these and I acknowledge them. But I also at the same time I see verses like Leviticus 25 and I can't
You
just
explain to you what you're doing is a word concept fallacy. This is literally referring to welfare. It's like what you're doing is like imagine 1,000 years from now you look at our culture and you're like, oh my god, they enslaved people with food stamps. Those monsters. Like this is dumb. What you're saying. You're like, do you want to be dumb?
I'm not trying. I'm only here just to like learn.
Yeah,
You're not though, because you keep bringing
Check it
up
out.
things. You keep beating a dead horse. We already explained thoroughly what you're doing is a word concept fallacy. Just because the word says slave doesn't mean the concept is the same thing as that happened in the Civil War.
I've barely spoke. I've let you guys. Can I come to my point then?
Right? Yeah. Eclipse. Are you a Christian?
I'm not. But like I'm open minded. I've
Yeah. I could tell. Yeah. We gave you some sources. And if you have any more questions, you can just let us know.
okay.
We appreciate it.
All right. Yeah.
If I wanted to talk to you, Darth, I'd join your stupid life. I'm
Goodbye,
talking to the host.
goodbye, whining little boy. Boy.